ahead and get started. Hi, like I said, good afternoon. Welcome to Intro to Admission Counseling, PNACAC's webinar for admission counselors who are here, who have been in the industry probably first to 3 years. And so we're glad you joined us today. My name is Ray Pepley, and I am a high school college counselor in Meridian, Idaho, which is next to Boise. So you might know Boise a little bit more than Meridian, but I'm part of PNACAC's Professional Development Committee. And my co-chair is Palmer Muntz. He is below me in the webinar. If you've joined us before, you've seen us in these webinars. And so we're so glad that you came today. Also joining us is Erin Jensen. She is our PNACAC, well, the chair of our PNACAC Technology Committee, and we're grateful for her support and assistance. So I am opening us up today because Palmer and Erin are the presenters today. And they presented in the College Counseling 101 webinar this morning, and they did such a great job. I'm anxious to hear the presentation again. I learned quite a bit, and I think you will as well. So our next slide has the future presentations, I think, or is that not? So I'll let Erin move us over. Yeah. So our next presentation is in March, and that's why equity matters. And then we're going to round out the year with our last one in April, which is building a career in admissions. So looking forward to those as well. And then I'm sure you've seen the emails, but if you haven't yet, PNACAC is hosting our Where It All Began conference at beautiful Willamette University in beautiful Salem, Oregon. So I hope you'll join us. I've been to a few of them, and I walked away each time with such great information that I was able to take back to my building. So impactful and helpful, and I love the networking part. So I hope I get to see many of you at our next conference. So please register and apply for a scholarship. There's still scholarships available. That hasn't been released yet, the scholarship application. I was a recipient of a scholarship when we hosted at Helena, in Helena last year, Montana, and it was very helpful for me to be able to attend that conference. So hope you join us. And then we're going to get into the webinar, but I'd like to introduce Palmer and Erin a little bit more, though. I didn't do that at the beginning. So Erin, you might recognize her from her time working at Washington State University in head of admissions. And then I knew her best from when she worked at Portland State. She came to my school often, and then also Western Washington University. And now she is doing more consulting. And then also, you can tell me if I'm wrong on this, Erin, but she's also working with students in private admissions counseling. So grateful for that help. And then Palmer, everybody knows Palmer, right? Palmer is so great. You've known him best from University of Alaska Fairbanks, that gorgeous campus, but he's a regional representative, lives in Vancouver, and he's visited Idaho a few times. We love that. But you probably would know him also from, gosh, Oregon Tech, right? And Asbury and Palmer. I don't know.
I can't hold a job. I just keep jumping jobs.
But I feel like you're just sharing your knowledge with every
Sure,
university. I mean,
sure.
That's where we need to go. Both of you are wonderful. I just feel blessed to know them. But now I'm just babbling on. So I'm going to turn the reins over to them because I need to shut up. So I think Erin, are you getting started or Palmer?
Sure.
Sure. Okay, sorry. I'm really bumbling this. So I'm going to shut up.
Thank you, Ray. This is fantastic.
Oh my gosh.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I know it's towards the end of the day, but hopefully this fascinating topic of financial aid will keep you awake for the next 45 minutes to an hour. I'm so glad you're here today, though. This is such incredibly important conversation times to have with students. And it's just, for me, it's really important as an admissions professional to understand the financial aspects of a student's decision making. Obviously, your job is recruitment, and making that decision to actually enroll at your institution has a lot to do with the cost piece. So that's really why we wanted to make sure we offered this topic to you as admissions counselors. We both have experience in admissions, and so but at different types of institutions and in different ways. And so we'll hopefully kind of get into that a little bit. But as Ray said, Palmer works at University of Alaska Fairbanks, although regionally based in Vancouver, Washington. And then I am also actually based in Vancouver, Washington. We're really not that far away from each other.
Yeah.
Although we're on Zoom right now. But I have moved into working with students independently, and then I also do higher ed consulting. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. I think it's near and dear to both of our hearts. So all right, so let's get started with just kind of what we're going to cover today. We really want to make sure that we start with the same place of understanding when it comes to foundational terms and definitions that you probably will hear students bring up in conversations with you. You might even see it on your own institution's offer letter, but things that you might want to bring into the conversation anyway to help them consider what sort of decisions they should be making. We're going to look at a few examples of offer letters, but more importantly, we're going to role play two different conversations with students that we really are kind of like conversations we've had over and over with students before to help you get the sense of what those talking points might be as you're working with your prospective students. And then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A, although I definitely would encourage you to put things into the Q&A box as they come up, and then we'll probably get into them and answering them towards the end. So don't wait until the very end and don't forget your question, just drop it into the Q&A box. And then the last thing I think we both wanted to say is that we both have worked with transfer students and non-traditional students, but this session is really kind of geared towards working with high school traditional students. And so that reminds me, I have a poll that I want to launch. There we go. We kind of wanted to get a sense of who's here in the room. It looks like we have about 12, 13 people here today. If you can just real quickly let us know, how long have you been in your current role? What types of students are you primarily discussing financial aid with? And then your level of comfort with discussing financial aid offers. And then we will report on that. Always helpful for us to know our audience. At this point, every single one of you works primarily with high school students. Great. This should be spot on. Most of you are in your first year. Lovely. And then a few of you from in your second to fifth year. All right. And then seems like it's mostly either you're not comfortable talking about offer letters or you can kind of muddle your way through it. One person could do it with their eyes closed. High five. Hopefully you'll still learn things today, but you can help your colleagues as well. This is great. I am going to end the poll, and doesn't look like every single person has participated, but that's okay. Let's take a look at those results.
Someone probably had to step away from their computer for a second to take a phone call or something.
Something like that, yeah.
Because they've got their job still to do.
So yeah, most of you are in your first year, which I'm so glad you're here and willing and ready to learn this information. Okay, fantastic. Stop that. And we're going to move along. So really our ultimate goal for having conversations about financial aid offers as part of our recruitment conversation is to help students understand the true cost for them of attending our institution, and then compare that apples to apples with other institutions that they might be considering. And really that's obviously to help them understand what's the most affordable option and then make an informed college decision. Ideally, that would be your institution. It might not be, but it's still, I believe, in our duty as an admissions counselor to help them learn this information and learn this process so that they don't make a mistake and they still enroll in the college that is the best fit for them. So getting started with some foundational terms and definitions. When a student is looking at an offer letter, or if you are looking at it with them, you will probably see some of these terms related to costs. The cost of attendance is actually a federally mandated term. It is, and obviously it means the cost of attending college, but it is a federally mandated term, and there are actually federally mandated categories within it that you'll see on every single offer letter. You should see on every single offer letter if a student were to bring one into your office. And it's typically split between direct costs. Those are things that a student would be paying your college directly for. They'd be getting a bill for it. So that's going to include things like tuition, obviously, and fees. And it very often will include housing and meal plans. And then indirect costs. So as you know, there's all these other things you have to pay for. When you go to college, you have to buy books. You have to probably park on campus or maybe buy tickets to fly somewhere. All of those things are considered indirect costs because they're not paid to the college, but they are still something that a student should budget for. Collectively, that is considered a cost of attendance. Now, when we're looking at tuition, though, those of you who work at public institutions know that a student's residency status will determine whether they're charged non-resident tuition or resident tuition. And we all know that those are very different numbers, right? And helping students understand the difference between those two things can be part of this conversation. Western undergraduate exchange tuition is something you might offer at your institution. Generally, it's going to be kind of a middle of the road. It's not non-resident tuition, it's not resident tuition. It's usually kind of in the middle. Most institutions will use 150% of in-state tuition to come up with that WUI rate. Not every college does that, but that's the most common way of doing it. And then plateau tuition versus per credit tuition is something to help students understand. You should probably know this about your own institution too. Does your college charge students the same amount for full-time enrollment, no matter how many credits they're in? That's full-time. Or do they charge per credit? So 12 credits would be less than 15 credits, even though both are full-time. That can make a pretty big difference if a student is thinking long-term and thinking about how many credits they might want to enroll in. Personal and miscellaneous is, we threw this in here because I personally have gotten asked so many times from students, what is personal and miscellaneous? What does that even mean? And I like to say it's pretty much anything that's not considered any of the other categories. So I'll often say it's essentials like, clothing and toiletries, maybe some non-essentials like a Netflix subscription, your Steam account to play video games, going to athletic events. You want to budget for these other things that don't fall into the other categories. And Palmer, as he noted this morning, uses a lot of shampoo for his copious hair. So he was saying, he often says to students, yeah, you got to budget for that shampoo as part of those miscellaneous and personal items.
Otherwise, you might end up with a head of hair like mine.
All right. Palmer, do you want to talk a little bit about what some of these resources are that we might see?
Sure. And I'm guessing these are going to be familiar for the most part. I saw in the chat that Casey said he had worked as a financial aid counselor. So Casey, just don't even correct me on anything here. Just let everyone think I know what I'm saying. Okay. But these are some tools that can help with the costs. WUI is, of course, another example. Federal Pell Grants are sort of the big dog in the room, that everyone talks about, but there's a lot of other things. State grants, depending on which state you're in, you'll have grants that high school, students in general, maybe from your state can use, but typically only to go to colleges within their home state. You can't usually export them. Stafford loans are available to virtually every student. They come in two flavors, subsidized and unsubsidized. And just in case you don't know this, with a direct subsidized loan, the interest does not begin to accrue until the student has left college and has been out for 6 months. Whereas with the unsubsidized loan, which is not need-based, interest begins almost right away. Okay. Plus loans are a tool that families can use where the parents borrow on behalf of their student. I tend to be very cautious with these because I think this is one of the places where borrowing can kind of get out of control. And so, especially for students who are from lower socioeconomic families, I think they want to be cautious. Scholarships or awards, grants, those are free money that students don't have to repay. Scholarships typically are based on some sort of attribute of the students, whether that's their GPA or an athletic ability or something else. Grants are usually at least partially need-based. One thing you may want to be aware of, and we'll touch on this later, is whether the aid is renewable or is just for 1 year, whether it can be reapplied for, and so on. Work study and student employment are, in the end, very much the same thing for students. The opportunity to work while they're in school and to make money to help with their expenses. I sometimes have also lumped in summer employment for traditional age students. You know, if you work during the summer and put away half the money that you earn for college, that's helpful as well. The main difference between work study and regular student employment is that a student's wages when they're on work study are subsidized in part by the government. And therefore, sometimes students have a little bit easier time finding jobs when they're eligible for work study positions. Also, when they fill out future FAFSAs, they won't have to show the amount they earned through work study as income on that FAFSA. A lot of schools will have payment plans. These really are not extraordinary. I'm sure your school probably has them as well. But a payment plan that simply allows the student to take 3 or 4 months to pay the school bill off rather than having to pay everything right up front. And then you're probably also somewhat familiar with 529 college savings plans. These are, I think the shorthand for them is to say they're kind of like an IRA, but for college, where families or students themselves can put away money for college in a tax-advantaged way. The idea being that you do it over the course of many years, and then you have a nice lump sum to use.
All right, and then a few other terms that you'll probably hear thrown out there, or already have. One is changing, as you hopefully know by now, is the estimated family contribution, or EFC, that we've been using forever, is now changing to the student aid index. And that SAI will actually be all the way down to a negative number for our highest need students, whereas the EFC was a 0 previously. And that number is really intended to be the same thing, even though it's changing the name. This is meant to be the FAFSA, the federal government's definition of how much a family can contribute to 1 year of college. And so this number isn't necessarily as important to get into with students when you're looking at costs and how much they might end up paying, but it is important to know if they ever ask, well, how did you even get to this number of how much grant money I might be eligible for or something? Understanding how that number is part of the overall financial aid formula could be part of your conversation as you explain to them why they might be eligible for the Pell Grant or not eligible for the Pell Grant, for instance. So that's an important one to know about and research on your own. Verification is something that you may have also heard of. I actually did not come across verification in my job until much later in my career, where the admissions team was actually tasked with helping students submit documentation for financial aid verification. And this is typically when there's something either unusual about that student's FAFSA information that doesn't quite match up, and the government will flag it and say, hey, your schools need to collect different documentation from you, maybe verify your W-2 or your tax forms. Or it's completely random. Students can be randomly selected for verification just to ensure that the information they input was accurate. My hope actually is that because the FAFSA is so closely tied to the IRS documentation this year, this verification piece will be much less common. But you and your office may be involved in that verification process, helping students understand what to submit. Offers of aid are often going to be marked as, do you want to accept this or do you want to decline it? What I always like to remind students, and I think you should too, is that there's often an in-between, especially when it comes to loans. We'll look at this a little bit later, but students can accept a portion of a loan, and it often seems like they have to accept the whole thing. And that is a very misleading aspect of, I think, some offer letters. So understanding what that means. And typically your schools are going to auto accept grant money, because why would you decline free money from the government, right? That's typically done on their behalf, but helping them make the decision about loans is maybe part of your conversation. we often, those of us who've been in the field for a long time, will probably refer to these as financial aid award letters. But in the last few years, the financial aid professionals have started to use the term offer instead, because it is an offer. It's not actually awarding anything yet. And awards are often used in place of scholarship. So we got to think about that terminology, right? So offer letter is what we try to use now. I think it's important for students to know the difference between self-help aid and earned aid. That's some of that work study that Palmer was talking about in particular, but loans can also be considered a type of self-help, whereas gift aid is literally free money that a student does not have to pay back and they don't have to work for. And then special circumstances is another thing you'll potentially come across if a student says to you that there's something about their FAFSA that just is not accurate anymore. Maybe something has changed about their family's income situation, and they need that original 20, documents from 2 years ago to be reconsidered. That is a special circumstance, and that's actually a federal term. So your financial aid office can use their professional judgment to perhaps change a student's financial aid eligibility based on more holistic evaluations of their financial situation. And that is different at every college, right? So every financial aid office gets the ability to make that decision for their own financial aid offers. So it is an option out there, but there
Yeah,
are
and
rules.
this is a place where if you're a careful listener with your student and you can pick up on some of the challenges that they may be running into as a family, whether that's a death in the family, a divorce, a loss of employment, or maybe a high medical expenses that aren't covered by insurance, being able to talk with them about this and connect them with the financial aid office could be a life-changing conversation.
Absolutely. I've
They
seen it be
they
a
won't know
life-changing.
they won't know enough maybe to ask, but when you can bring it up and help them understand, that's great.
All right, so let's take a look at some example offer letters. I really wish I had thought to put a poll in to ask how many of you have seen the offer letter at your own institution. Not everybody has. And I think if you haven't yet, make friends in the financial aid office if you haven't yet, and then take a look at one of those offer letters or ask a student if
Well,
you can see
and I
theirs.
was telling Erin, I've been at UAF for about 6 years. I have never actually seen our own offer letter. I've seen financial aid awards in our database, but I don't know what the physical offer letter looks like, believe it
Yeah,
or not.
yeah.
So
And I do remember, looking at a paper version of this when I was going to college, and I do think most institutions still do that, but quite a few students will be looking at a digital version, and we're not even including a copy of that in here. So it might look totally different in that way too. What we've done is pulled two financial aid offer letters from institutions outside of our region. So we're not obviously looking at anybody that you might know. One is Transylvania University in Kentucky, and the other is University of Northern Iowa. But we just wanted to put these in front of you in case you haven't seen one lately. They're very different, obviously, in how they're laid out. But we actually think these are both good offer letters in general because they present information in a relatively easy to understand way for students, include separating out those indirect and direct costs, including some stuff about, you need to probably check on the renewal requirements for scholarships. Hopefully, and I really do believe that most of our institutions in this region have offer letters that fulfill some of these best practices. But knowing what to point to and where on your institution's offer letter, if a student were to bring one to you, is something you should probably practice doing, especially before they start going out for this cycle, so that you feel prepared to show them, here is how much your direct costs will be, here is how much your Pell Grant is, et cetera, et cetera. So familiarizing yourself with what they look for, what they look like is what we're trying to get at here. Palmer, do you want to add to that?
I think the other thing that we liked about these letters was the way that they separated out some information in terms of laying out the costs clearly, both those that are part of the school bill and those that would be separate, personal things, and separated out grants from self-help. And in fact, I made a comment this morning during the webinar that if everyone's financial aid offer looked like the one here from Transylvania, we probably wouldn't even need to have this conversation hardly because it's so clear. The other thing I think that we talked about this morning, Erin, was that some offer letters will show the full year, while others will break it down by term. Um, there's no right or wrong necessarily, but it's just something to be aware of, that it may lead to either confusion or clarity. Sometimes, you're working with a 17-year-old first-gen student. They might look at that full year total cost and think they have to pay that much on August 25th when they arrive on campus. So those are some things to make sure the student is clear on.
So here's some examples of things we don't like seeing in offer letters. Just in case yours does happen to look like this, which I doubt it would, just know that you would have to probably help a student suss out some of this information. So for instance, actually, let me go back a slide. This first one here does not even have indirect costs on it. So this doesn't even explain to a student what they might want to budget for transportation, for instance, or living on campus. It doesn't even say whether living on campus is required or not. And then it mixes all of the free money, the grant money, with the loans, and the loans aren't even called loans. They're just called L.
And that's just like the unforgivable sin in my book. For instance, one line there says Fed unsub staff. No
What does that even
indication,
mean?
not even the L there to
Yeah.
indicate that it's a loan. Another thing here, Erin, you and I were looking at is the fact that they mix the plus in there. And there's nothing wrong with that, but
Right,
it could certainly lead families to the wrong conclusion about what they should or have to do
right.
in order to
So,
pay for
oops.
college.
So this one right here, it says parent plus L, which we know is a loan. Student might not. You see, it's a pretty large number because parents can typically borrow a lot more. And that might look fantastic to a student, yet that number is not guaranteed. And as you've heard, we don't always recommend that for families. It's a pretty big burden to take on. This one here actually includes work study, but as you know now, that is not guaranteed money. It's typically just a maximum that a student could earn through work study. So we had to include some bad examples in here just so you know what hopefully a good offer letter looks like, and where to look for those discrepancies to explain to a student a little bit more.
It's probably rare that a student will come to you and show you an offer letter from another school, but to have some idea of what you might see, that could be helpful. So, and then it's something else just to transition here is, I hope that you feel comfortable just raising the question of finances. It's something I was reluctant to do earlier in my career. Now that I'm getting old, I don't care what anyone thinks anymore. No. But I think that don't be afraid to broach the subject. And one of my favorite ways to bring it up is to just say something along the lines of, "Hey, when you're looking ahead to college, and money and paying for it, are you freaked out, or are you not worried at all, or somewhere in between?" And just allow the student to give you a sense of where they're at in the stress they're feeling, where they're at emotionally with that. And I've had students give all three responses. "Oh, I'm not worried about it at all. My parents started a 529 plan for me when I was born." And so, or whatever. And others who they're able then to share, "Yeah, I'm really concerned." And I've gotten to the point where when it feels appropriate, I've sometimes even asked that question the very first time that I've met with a student. Now, where I go with the conversation at that point is different than what I'll do after they've applied and have an offer of aid and everything in hand. But I think it's good to just raise that issue, let the student know that you're comfortable talking about it. That'll help them feel comfortable. Erin, do you have any other thoughts along
Yeah,
those
I mean, I
lines?
would add, and again, this I think comes from just similar to you, years of experience, but also I would say um, good relationships with financial aid colleagues and training along the way, that truly come to believe that conversations about financial aid are a very important part of the recruitment process. talking about how great your majors are, or, what activities a student can have on campus and all of those things, that's all part of your recruitment conversation. But being able to effectively talk through an offer letter or talk to a student about whether your institution is affordable for them, that is often going to seal the deal for your recruitment conversations. And so it is a field that I think, an area that I think a lot of admissions counselors feel very uneasy about. You're worried you're going to tell somebody something wrong, right? But it's still an important thing to learn and to always be learning. It's always changing. And I think it's a big part of recruitment. So I'll just leave that there. I could talk about that for a really long time. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to show you two different conversations. We're going to role play two different students and two different admissions counselors to give you a sense of what these conversations might look like. If you were to have a student walk in with your school's offer letter, I'd say, help me figure this out. And I am going to be the first student. I'm looking at an out-of-state college. I'm so excited to get out of my hometown, but I'm not entirely sure about the whole financial piece. So I'm going to Palmer to say, help me.
So Erin, I'm glad you feel comfortable, trusting me with this conversation. Hopefully we can help you, get a sense of, what the challenges are and how to make this work. So I've put together some numbers for you to give you an idea of where you stand with costs and so on. One really great thing is that you're eligible for the Western Undergraduate Exchange for WUI, which is basically a tuition discount that you're receiving. And it's going to cut your cost compared with non-resident tuition by about $13,000 a year. So it's like you're starting off right off the bat with a $13,000 scholarship.
Cool. How did I get that?
In your case, you got it simply because you're a resident of the state of Washington. And so at our school, we offer that to every student who's from Washington. One thing to be aware of is by accepting WUI, you also are agreeing that you're not going to seek in-state tuition, seek to become a resident. You're just going to say, hey, great, thank you. This is a good deal. If you want to, at another time, we can talk about whether it makes sense to turn down WUI and instead try to gain in-state status, and the pros and cons. But let's not worry about that right now, okay? So on average, we're looking at around $16,000 for your tuition and fees. It could vary a little bit depending on how many classes you take and so on, but it gives you at least a good ballpark for now, Erin. And then for living on campus, you're looking at a little over $11,000 for your housing and for a meal plan. Again, it could vary a little bit. Like, for instance, if you said you wanted to have a single room, those cost a little bit more. And certain meal plans can be a little more or a little less, but this is about average.
Do I have to live on campus, though?
In our case, you do. It'll vary from school to school. After your first year with us, you have some options along those lines. I think you'll find that living off campus in most cases is real comparable. And so you still need to budget for that expense, even if it's not part of your school bill. Okay. The other thing I want to mention is while we're looking right now at a cost of around, $27,000, it will vary a little bit from year to year. Costs do go up. And so don't worry about that. But I also just don't want you to feel like, hey, no one warned me that the cost might go up 5% a year or 4% a year or whatever. Okay. So now that we kind of know, in a sense, sort of what your sticker price is, let's look at the financial aid that you've been offered. You've got 3 different types of scholarships that have been awarded to you. So, and this, scholarships are free money. So free money is your friend, okay? So you have an academic scholarship worth about $8,000 a year. That's renewable for 4 years. You have a Nanook commitment scholarship it's $2,000 a year. That's tied to your FAFSA, and it's likely to stay the same from year to year, but could adjust. And then you have a third scholarship for $1,500. And this scholarship is a 1-year award. You can apply for it again, but it's not automatically renewable. So right now, what you're looking at is about $11,500 in gift aid. and you can do the math here. You subtract 11,500 from the 27,000, and what you have then is about $15,000 that you need to figure out a way to pay. Do you have $15,000 in your back pocket right now?
No.
Oh, okay, okay, that's okay. Well,
And
but
actually,
let me ask you a serious question.
okay.
You know, have you had the opportunity to talk with your parents about, what they may have available to help? Do you have a sense of how much money you can put towards this? When you look at 15,000, is your mind blown and you think there's no way you can ever do it, or does it feel real achievable?
Well, so here's the thing. I know my parents have been saving up some money in a savings account for me to go to college, but my mom just got laid off.
Mhm.
So now I'm just thinking I might not be able to go to college at all. I think,
Sure.
that's really changed their ability to help me pay for school in the next few years. And, um, yeah, I think that that's a really big number for us right now.
Absolutely, completely understand. Um, I want to come back and talk about your mom's situation in a second, but I also want to say, I don't ever want you to feel pressured, okay? I'm here just to help you put together information to make a good choice. So I'm laying out numbers for you, and I hope they don't stress you out, but so you know what you're dealing with, okay? So let's continue on. We've talked about the gift aid that's available to you, but you also have access to student loans, okay? Let me tell you a little bit about how, my sense is with student loans. I tend to see them as being a good investment in your future if you are capable and committed to graduating from college. What I really hate to see is for a student to borrow student loans for their freshman year and then leave college, because you still have to repay that loan, but you don't have that piece of paper and you don't have that experience to show for it, okay? So you have the ability to be successful, you have the commitment, you have the drive. If so, I wouldn't be afraid of student loans. And in particular, what you see here on the financial aid offer you received is the federal direct Stafford loan, okay? And as you go through college, if you can limit your borrowing to just the federal direct Stafford loans, I don't think you have to be concerned about the total amount you borrow spiraling out of control. Okay. Sometimes you hear reports in the news, terrible stories of, this person or that person with $100,000 in student loans. That's not going to be you. Okay. There are caps on how much you can borrow each year and how much you can borrow in total. And so if you end up maxing out your Stafford loans over the course of getting your bachelor's degree, you're probably looking at $300 to $350 a month in repayment over 10 years. That's a lot of money, but it's not unmanageable. And there are alternative repayments that will bring the amount down as well. Okay. Now, you're offered two different types of loans here. One is the subsidized Stafford loan. It's the more attractive one. And for that one, you won't even have any interest that's accumulating while you're in school. And the other one is what's called an unsubsidized loan. With that one, you won't have to make any payments unless you want to while you're in college, but interest will begin to accumulate. Okay. So for your freshman year, you're able to borrow up to $5,500. Let's just assume, based on what you've said to me, that you really don't have much choice. You need to borrow the full amount. Then you take your balance of 15,000, subtract out the 5,500. You're a little bit under $10,000 for what's left to handle. Okay. I'm going to ask again, just so you can answer. Okay. Does that feel manageable, or is that impossible, or you're not sure?
Close to 10,000 seems manageable for us right now. I mean, that just having to pay that amount could probably be doable.
Okay. So now let me sort of drop another shoe here. Okay. Couple other things I want you to know about. One is student employment, and the other is other expenses you'll encounter. Okay. So one thing I would encourage you to consider is the fact that you can get a job while you're in college, whether it's on campus or off campus. And there are studies that have shown that if you work a moderate number of hours a week, under 20 hours a week, it can actually help your academics. So don't be afraid of student employment, but you want to make sure it's not too heavy. And if you were to work, say, about 12 hours a week during the school year, that would bring you probably a little above $3,000 a year in earnings, okay? But you've got other expenses. So let's look at those. What we've looked at so far is what's your bill. But on top of that, you're going to need books for your classes. It's not like high school where they give you the books, and they loan you the books. You'll have personal expenses and miscellaneous things. You're going to have to buy a plane ticket to campus. That, maybe plane tickets, back and forth a couple of times. And so something I want you to know is you need to be prepared for these expenses. They also are things that are very fluid and you have a lot of control over. For instance, depending on, some you don't have control over. The cost of your books will vary somewhat depending on what classes you're in, what your major is, okay? And some years, $2,000 might be a high figure, and other years, you might actually spend a little bit more than that on books and supplies. This might be where your student employment comes in, okay, Erin? That you're able to use the student employment towards these expenses so you don't have to keep asking for money from home, okay?
So if I make about $3,000 a year, how am I going to cover the remaining 3,500 for all of these indirect costs?
Yeah, good question. And I don't necessarily have the answer for you, okay? This is kind of one of the things that I'm putting in front of you that with your parents need to figure out in order to make sure that this is a realistic choice for you, okay? One thing I want to say is we've offered you admission. That means we want you to come. But now the ball is in your court and you need to figure out if you want to accept that offer of admission, okay? A couple other things let me touch on, then we can move on. You mentioned mom and the loss of job. What I'd like to encourage you to do is reach out to our financial aid office and explain the situation to them. It's possible that they may be able to take that into account and adjust your aid to help you out some more. The worst thing they can say is no, so you've got nothing to lose by checking, okay? You'll probably have to fill out some paperwork for them, but I would definitely do that. Another thing to consider if you're concerned about the costs is you could adjust your credit load, maybe take, instead of taking 16 credits, take 12 or 13. That would result in a lower tuition bill. Be cautious about that because that also might then slow down your time to graduation. And you want to get graduated as quickly as possible, probably, okay? And also just throw this in there. We offer online classes that are at a tuition rate that's lower than WUI. So you may want to talk with your academic advisor about maybe mixing in 1 or 2 online classes per year. Each time you do that, it'll probably save you about $700 or $800. So it can add up, okay? But I think at this point, we've kind of given you the tools. If you have any other questions, I'm glad to talk with you, but hopefully this lays out the situation for you, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much. I feel a lot better about my financial situation now.
I'm so glad.
All right. So changing gears, Palmer, as a Washington resident, has applied to one of his in-state public institutions, and I am his admissions counselor, and he's come to me and said, hey, I need help. So Palmer, thanks so much for meeting with me. I'm really excited to talk to you about this. I think this is going to be a helpful conversation for you to learn a little bit more about what it's going to take to come here.
Yeah,
So,
I appreciate that because I'm kind of worried from everything I've seen, like
okay.
how much colleges cost.
Well, when you first saw your financial aid offer, what were some of the first things that came to mind for you when you saw this first bit here?
Well, $11,000
Yeah,
that's a lot of money. I don't have that much right now in my back pocket.
right, right. And have you had a chance to look over the grant and award that that you received with your family, or have you taken that into
I just
consideration?
kind of glanced at it. I wasn't
Okay.
sure what it all meant.
Okay. Well, I am really happy to tell you that you actually have received more gift aid than the cost of tuition. So that means, in effect, your
Uh,
tuition is completely covered. We're going to talk a little bit about other things you might need to account for with costs, but that resident tuition and fees piece is covered for you. You will not have to pay tuition and fees. Does that make you feel a little bit better right off the bat?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. And so part of the reason this is the case is because when you filled out the FAFSA, the information that we got from them about your financial situation told us that you qualified for what's called the federal Pell Grant. That's free money
Mhm.
from the federal government to help you go to college. And it also meant that you qualified for the Washington College Grant. That's just to go to school here in the state of Washington. That grant is actually the most generous state need grant in the United States. So you're very lucky to live in the state of Washington for one thing. But it also, what's great about it, unlike the Pell Grant, is that it actually will increase in amount if you go to a college that has higher tuition. So if you're looking at other Washington colleges, you might see a different Washington College grant amount on there because they probably have a different tuition rate. So keep that in mind. And then the President's Award you received because you have a good GPA. So our institution gave you that money. It's a 1-year award, so I do encourage you to continue to apply for scholarships every year. Keep your GPA
Okay.
up, and you might qualify for additional scholarships in the future. But the Pell Grant and the Washington College Grant are based on your family's income. So if that does not change for the next few years, you'll probably see similar amounts of aid on each year's financial aid offer. And tuition will change as well, but those amounts are supposed to hopefully change with it, right? And help you cover that tuition for all 4 years. So at the end
Okay.
here, you'll see that your direct costs, the tuition and fees, minus the gift aid that you have, is a negative number. That actually means that we're going to give you a refund. We're going to give you money in
Wow.
your pocket to help cover other expenses. Now, you'll notice on here that because we don't require living on campus, we
Oh,
and you live nearby, we want to give you the choice whether you're going to pay for housing on campus, right? So that's something we should talk about a little bit later. But the other thing I want to let you know is that you're also going to see that you've qualified for some loans. And what have you heard about loans, at school or in your family?
not very much, you
Okay.
know. Uh, So I'm the first one to go to college,
All
from
right.
our family, so I'm kind of clueless.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about these specific loans in particular. Unlike a loan from a bank, these are intended for students. So they actually have specific interest rates, the amount of money you have to pay over the time that you're paying it back. And they also have payback periods that are specific to when you are in school and when you're not in school. That makes them the best type of loan to take out if you need them. But what I'm going to tell you right now is really important. You do not need to take out loans. It's always your choice.
Oh,
You
I
might
don't have to take them?
you do
Okay.
not have to take them out. I think a lot of students think that applying for financial aid means you have to take out loans, and you don't. Some students need them,
Okay.
absolutely. But I think we'll want to look at this in your case and decide if you need to take them out at all or if you want to take a portion of them. You'll notice we say here it's a maximum amount. So you don't
Mhm.
necessarily even have to take out a loan in that full amount. If you were to pick one, I would recommend the subsidized. You'll notice one's subsidized, one's unsubsidized. The reason that's called that is because the federal government subsidizes the interest while you're in school. So you don't need to pay that interest on your loan while you're going to school. So it's a
Yeah.
better of the two. So if you were to say, hypothetically, take out both of those loans for 1 year, you would be getting in your hand, in your pocket, over $7,000 a year. Okay.
Yeah.
But we've also told you that you could work on campus and you've qualified for Washington's work study program. This isn't guaranteed money, but I know you've expressed in the past you're thinking of working on campus. This means
Mhm.
that you could actually make up to $3,000 a year by working on campus. And so that could help you as well with some of these costs.
Okay.
So how are you feeling so far about the cost of your 1 year of college?
Well, I guess I'm kind of like thinking, well, maybe if I've got $7,000, I can go, I don't have to even stay at home. I can go get an apartment or something.
Okay. Yeah. So let's talk about what those indirect costs might look like. If you were to live on campus, the average amount of our room and board, the meal plan and the housing is about $12,000.
Mhm.
And so, yes, that is a big chunk of change. And it looks like some of the money you could get here wouldn't necessarily go too far with that. But I'm going to warn you that rent and groceries around here might end up being around that amount for 1 year. You'd have to do that
Yeah.
research and figure out what rent might be. Is your family open to you staying at home? Are you thinking about that might be an option for you?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a problem. It's
Okay,
just be kind of fun to, not
live
be,
off campus.
yeah, or
Yeah,
whatever.
okay,
But yeah, those numbers are starting to look big.
right. So this is one thing where I would say, you've got books and supplies you need to account for. You have to buy textbooks.
Two thousand
Um,
dollars for books.
Potentially, it depends on your major. It usually depends on how you're buying books. You can usually buy them you could rent them, you could buy them and sell them back. There's lots of really great ways and tips to
Okay.
save on books. Personal can be up to you. You can be a very frugal person and definitely not spend that much on personal. And because you're local, I doubt you'd spend $2,000 on transportation, right? You live pretty
Oh,
close.
okay.
So let's kind of just scratch some stuff off here, and we're going to make some notes on your offer letter and say, look, if you live at home, technically you're not paying anything. That's one big chunk out of here
Tell
of your
that to my
costs.
dad.
Yeah, there you go.
He'll tell me how much it costs.
That's true. If you were to drive your car to campus and around town and park on campus, you might spend about $1,000 a year on that. Okay, so that's less than what we've put on here. And let's say you don't take out that unsubsidized Stafford loan, but you might want to consider something in that subsidized Stafford loan, right? If you were to change your indirect costs, because your tuition's covered, and let's say you only have about 5,500 a year to account for your books and supplies and personal and parking and gas. You get your 2,200 in your refund money guaranteed. You still need to account for $3,300. If you work on campus, you make that maximum.
Mhm.
You're almost there. If you choose not to work on campus, well, maybe you do want to consider some of that loan
Well,
money.
what if I don't take the loan at all, but then later on, like maybe my car breaks down or something and I have
Really good
trouble.
question.
Do I have to take the money now just in case I need it?
No, that's the beauty of it. You can actually go back to your financial aid office in the middle of the term, and if you already qualified for that loan money at the beginning of the year, they have the ability to help you take some of that out in the middle of the year or the middle of the term.
Okay.
So you can go back and dip into that a little bit later. We usually recommend trying to figure out really the smallest amount of loan money you might need up front.
Mhm.
Otherwise, don't take it out and decide later if you need that loan money. Okay,
Okay, cool.
great. So I would actually say, compared to other students that I've seen, I've kind of seen the whole range. You have a really good financial aid offer. It's covering your
Yeah,
tuition and fees, and you have some options to cut down on indirect costs. So does that help you feel a little bit better?
yeah, absolutely.
Great. All right. Thanks
So,
for meeting with me, Palmer. All right. So those of you who've heard two different examples kind of get a sense, I think, of how you can walk someone through step by step and alleviate some of the fear and stress that comes along with these offer letters and help educate students about what they mean and how to plan ahead.
just how to think for themselves on these things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So just a few more things. We wanted to let you know we've actually created a worksheet that
And
you
by the way, when
could
we say we mean Erin, okay? She gets all the credit, not me,
informed
okay?
by your advice, Palmer.
Okay, okay.
So Panacac now has a offer letter comparison worksheet that you could provide to your students if they have expressed some concern. You could fill it in for them for your college, right? Your college one could be your college.
Yeah, use this for the
Um,
conversation. Yeah.
Right. And walk through it with them. And the other side of it has some just glossary information and tips. But we have a digital version of it that we'll share with you as well. It's a spreadsheet and it does all the math. So they can just plug in numbers and voila, it's got some of that stuff done for them. And we'll share that with all of you after the webinar. The last thing we wanted to talk about is verification. And again,
And we
you
mean
might not,
literally the last thing we want
the
to talk
last thing.
about is
Yes.
verification.
It probably, it may or may not come up this year because of all the changes with the FAFSA, but in case it does, and in the future, there's a time frame here you should know about. Right here, when a college is receiving students' financial aid information, before they package that aid offer. So if a student comes to you and says, I submitted the FAFSA, but I haven't gotten my offer letter yet, it might be because they were selected for verification. And sometimes the financial aid office will take care of that for you, but you might be able to help a student figure out what that documentation needs to be and help them submit it. So again, changes depending on your institution, but know that this might be why they're saying to you, I still don't know how much it's going to cost. I don't know what I'm going to get. If you can learn a little bit about how to look that up for them, you could help them make that decision. And hopefully, like Palmer said, it could be a life-changing decision for them. We will also include these resources in the slides, some really great articles to read through and our worksheets. So know that this is not the end of your learning about this topic. Oh, there we go. And if you have other questions for us, we definitely want to be a resource for you too. We've done this a lot. So let us know if you have questions.
Oh,
All right. Thank you.
great.